Nick, just to begin with you, we, of course, saw Blinken in the region again over the weekend. And we know that earlier today, President Biden spoke on the phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, talking about the idea of tactical pauses. But beyond saying it was discussed, it doesn't seem that anything was agreed. Right. And I just wonder if these U.S. calls are being heeded at all by Israel.
Well, I mean, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, obviously, but certainly from a public perspective, it really looks like Israel is essentially not listening to the United States. Tony Blinken was in the region. President Biden speaks with Prime Minister Netanyahu and says, listen, we are not asking for a ceasefire. We are asking for brief pauses so that aid can continue to flow into the Gaza Strip and so that people can leave, foreigners especially can leave. And so far, what it looks like is Israel is just saying, absolutely not. We have encircled Gaza City, and we are determined to go in, and we are just not going to do it. So, bit of a bad look for Secretary Blinken when he went in. This was essentially his top goal when he was in the region, and he didn't get it.
Well, I was at the White House today, and on my walk in, the White House, some of the structures were covered with handprints in red paint. As you could see it now, is the picture I took earlier this morning. I believe they were taking it down. Free Palestine. Ton of blowback, Nick, on this administration, because every single day the tally of civilians is going up, especially children. At what point is that pressure really going to get exerted on Tel Aviv?
Well, I mean, again, I think the Biden administration strategy here was, hey, big, warm embrace of Netanyahu at the beginning, and then that would give them the space behind the scenes to be able to say, okay, listen, you need to ease off. But obviously what we're seeing now is that Netanyahu, the Israeli Defense Forces, are essentially saying, no, we are not going to do that. We have to go in. This was our 9/11. You don't get it. The problem is that the blowback Biden and Blinken are getting both in the Arab world but also at home are turning into a major liability for them, particularly as the death toll continues to rise. So, this is really something that they have not worked out, and we're just going to have to see how it unfolds.
So to Nick's point, Megan, this is an issue abroad, but it also is an issue at home, and it's an issue on Capitol Hill as well. By and large, there is bipartisan support for Israel in Congress. There's just not really clarity on how that support should be delivered, I think is fair to say. There needs to be something reconciled between how the House would like to see this funding go through and how the Senate would like to. Are we going to see real progress on that this week, anytime soon, given this is a hot conflict ongoing as we speak?
I think we're going to see a lot of starts and stops this week. We have the House passed bill, which is Israel aid exclusively, in which the White House has threatened to veto because it would pay for it by taking money out of the IRS budget, $14 billion to be exact. So then you have the Senate working on a much larger package, a package that also includes Ukraine money, includes border, and then undergirding all of this is ongoing negotiations about government spending. Remember, we're about 11 days out from a threatened government shutdown. So that is also part of these larger negotiations. The bills at this point are all separate, but I would not be surprised if we saw some combining just to get them through one or both chambers.
What is your team hearing right now? Do you think Israel will get done before a potential government shutdown? Is that even possible?
It's certainly possible. The House passed its bill, but I would say it's unlikely at this point. It takes about a week for any piece of legislation to make its way through the Senate, and Senate Democrats are not going to go along with what the House passed because of this IRS funding and because of the White House veto threat.
Well, on the subject of the White House, let's talk about who's going to be sitting in it come, I don't know, a year and 2 months from now, right? That's where we are. There was a poll that made a lot of noise over the weekend. New York Times, Siena, that looked at key swing states, honestly pretty similar to the poll that Bloomberg did with Morning Consult a few weeks ago. But, Megan, the gist of it is that in 5 of these really critical states, it is former President Trump that is leading Biden. Voters have issues on the economy, on the former president's age. He's losing support with Black, Hispanic, and young voters, it seems. And now there's even calls from Democratic strategists like Axelrod basically saying that Biden needs to not be the one who runs for the Democratic nomination. Is there a real likelihood that it's not going to be him?
Not that we're seeing so far, but the poll was pretty staggering, as was the Bloomberg poll last week. Some of the things that stood out for me in this New York Times poll, 22% of Black voters would support Donald Trump. Then you also have all of these these legal cases that the former president is sitting through, and including today a pretty astonishing testimony in his civil fraud trial in New York. And still he's amassing all of this support. What we're also going to see, if these polls are correct, and we certainly know from 2016 that polls aren't always correct, especially this far out, but there could be some real down ballot repercussions as well. All of these states are swing states. They all have competitive Senate races in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Arizona. And we could see the Senate also switch. The hope was among Democrats that with Biden at the top of the ticket, he could bring these swing states. And what these polls are showing us is that is not the case.
When you look at foreign policy into these polls, former president is actually scoring better points than Joe Biden at this moment. What does that say to you, especially as Biden is about to sit down with Xi Jinping at this moment? Is he going to get a lot of blowback for that?
Well, this is a constant challenge for the Democrats and for Biden, especially because what you see in these polls is a sense that former President Trump was just tougher with foreign leaders. You know, they'll say, oh, there were no wars under Donald Trump. You know, Putin was too afraid to go after Ukraine. You didn't see this kind of violence against Hamas and by Hamas into Israel. So there's this sort of toughness factor. The question for President Biden is, well, then what does that cause him to do with Xi Jinping? And the fear among folks who believe there should be some form of not accommodation, but at least coexistence between the U.S. and China is that this toughness element, the pressure on him to be the tough guy, is really only going to force him to harden his line against Xi Jinping if they do end up meeting next month in San Francisco, as we expect.